Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Tips and Tricks webinar. Today's topic, as you can see, is on ElasticXL. This is our new clustering protocol. It's coming out in R82, which is GA now. So please use the Q&A chat. If you have any questions during the webinar, we'll make sure we answer those. Our presenter today is our security architect, Jay Bendonis. Oh, Jay Dot. Jay, what do you have for us today?
I'm s- Thank you so much for the intro.
I screwed
You're
up. I
pretty,
told you I would.
you got every name possible. It's perfect, and it's a good way to start. So, good morning and happy Halloween to everybody. So, I'm going to go over a little bit of the new features and one of the new features in R82 today, ElasticXL, which is our updated clustering technology. Um, for anybody that's on the call that's still running VERP, it might be worth paying attention. So, I'm just going to jump right in, talk a little bit about the high level overview and then kind of roll into the product. Um, so ElasticXL, it came from our Maestro technology. We're now taking it, allowing regular gateways to be able to scale at the same rate that Maestro does. There are a few things that Maestro is going to do better. I'll get into those as we go on. But for all of our standard customers, we can actually go through and give you a scale over time solution for your existing gateways without adding Maestro to the solution. So as this, it's going to support all the technologies that you currently use and a whole lot more. Now I'm going to give you the eye chart. I'm going to pause for a second while everybody reads. You'll notice that the last two columns are ElasticXL and Maestro are pretty much all green in this state. The real difference between ElasticXL and Maestro is the lack of the Maestro hardware, where it gives it a true load balancing scenario. ElasticXL is going to load share through the technologies we have, but it'll support all of the features that you're looking at here simply simply over the course of time. We think this is a huge improvement as time moves forward. And I'd like to go in a little more detail here. I'm assuming everybody's took a look at the eye chart. So simplified cluster management, one IP per interface. No longer you need one for each physical and one for VIP. This is a feature that's probably going to be used a lot by a lot of our customers that are running their remote branch that they only get one IP from their ISP. Also, IP space savings. Right now, IP addresses are a commodity. We need to be able to save all the ones we have. Deployment is a lot simpler than the traditional method, as I will go into as we move forward. And with this, I'll give you a little bit of a preview of our Insights tool, which is new with R82 as well. But there'll be more coming on that. Not going to focus as much on it uh, as I will later. So really, why ElasticXL? We wanted to get down to a single management object. It can be configured through the Gaia Web UI or Clish. I'll show both as we go forward. And API support for adding and removing gateways. So this will reduce a lot of your any kind of downtime due to the nature of bringing the clusters together. And you'll all understand that very quickly. And then being able to scale up to 3 nodes. Now, ElasticXL does do a load sharing scenarios. You no longer need to have a simple standby member in your data center that's not really doing any work except for keeping your business afloat. This you can now use the secondary piece of equipment for traffic flows, allowing you a little more throughput or a lot more throughput of being able to utilize all the boxes in the stack. So when we recommend it right now, we do not have a conversion that allows you to go from ClusterXL to ElasticXL on your existing gateways. So we're currently recommending this for any kind of new deployments, as well as a dual site support. So where Maestro will support dual sites, so will ElasticXL. So you can spread your load out across multiple data centers. It can use up to 3 nodes right now. That's what we're supporting, where it uses a single pivot member to function as the SMO to do the traffic distribution. It will, like I said, it scales to 3. Maestro scales significantly higher. And then for ClusterXL, solid technology. You've all been using it for years. We use that. We're going to say stick with a cluster Excel in your existing environments, but when you go to upgrade, that would be the right time. So I'm going to dig a little deeper into the ElasticXL architecture. So magic. So next hop address, single gateway, single management object. This cluster that you're seeing on the screen now on your management will look like a single object. It's configured as a single object and will work as a single object. And then the traffic will flow through the system as you're seeing on the screen now, where it'll come into the SMO. And then the SMO will say, based on our distribution calculation, you're going to get handled by the second gateway, kicks the traffic over to the second gateway, and then passes it through to the internal network. Now, let's do this. I'm going to fill this screen out. So, excuse me, whilst I take a quick breath. So, Maestro is really designed for linear scaling. Add another gateway, you get that gateway's worth of throughput to the Maestro stack. Up to 8 security groups, 14 members per site, and it does simplify the cabling. You only have your infrastructure cabling comes from the orchestrator, and the only thing you're plugging into the firewalls is downlinks from the orchestrator. ElasticXL simplifies a whole pile of this scenario with one minor complexity, as every firewall will need to be connected to every network. The same way you would right now, but if you're at a third, you need to add the third in. As part of it, though, it does simplify a lot of your clustering because you can then start moving through the pivot scenario where you will send traffic to one gateway. The gateway will do a calculation based on source and destination and say, oh, you should be managed by member two. Similar to Maestro, it does keep a copy of that flow in the connection table. So if something were to happen, you lose power in your data center, power supply blows, somebody trips over a cable, it will then be processed by another member in the stack, similar to the way that Maestro does right now. So kind of digging into a little bit of an enabling, um, it's kind of done. It's basically done automatically. As you start digging through the first time wizard, you'll go through and say, yes, I want to enable this as an ElasticXL cluster. It'll grab your first interface, the first interface in the box, generally the management interface, build a management aggregation port used as management, and then we'll grab the second port or the sync port, depending on how the box is configured, and build that as your synchronization network, creating, if anybody's worked with Maestro, notice the IP addressing, we use similar IP addressing inside the stack to allow us to be able to monitor the stack as a whole. From there, all the data interfaces get a unicast MAC, and then we use, once again, pivot mode for passing traffic. So from there, physical connectivity, management and sync, all enabled during the first time wizard. When the wizard goes through, and by the way, the new UI, it'll take the data interfaces and update them with checkpoint MAC addresses, as you see here, as well as grab the management interface and build a bond for it. Now, in a single node, it will build a single port bond, but then it will also modify the entire scenario to allow you to then give you a single management IP, as well as building out your sync bonds so that you can have multiple boxes that can be able to talk to each other. And this process is sorry, minor stop there. This process is entirely done through the first time wizard. We take care of this in the back end. You don't need to manage anything like this, anything of this nature at all. The one thing I will say is we will consider port one or the management port and the sync port to be the used ports for both of those flows on any box. So if you're in a scenario where you're running management off of a different port, we need to account for that when we're starting to create an ElasticXL cluster. Same for sync. So the basic traffic flow, I have our environment. The SMO, the single management object, which is something we've carried over from Maestro for ElasticXL, will be the first member in the cluster. That cluster will handle all the traffic distribution, and Unlike in Maestro, there's a little bit of a little bit of a performance hit to the primary member simply for managing the traffic. But at that point, you can then utilize both members of the cluster. So when the request flows through the firewall, it'll bounce back, similar to what I was showing earlier, and send it to the appropriate gateway to handle the traffic. The request will go through the pivot member, say, okay, I'm going to be passed off to my secondary member, and then pass through the gateway. The response traffic will always go to the SMO, be handled by that. The SMO will then kick it over to the gateway that originally processed the flow, so it will continue. This doesn't affect NAT. This won't affect your downstream routers either because both firewalls are functioning as a single system. So a little more details. Building a cluster, like I said, first time wizard. When the first time wizard, configure ElasticXL, and then you configure the interfaces on the box that you're working from. Establish stick with management and install a policy. At that point, you would power on any additional appliances and then add them to the cluster. What will then happen is the second node, second and third, will get the image, the configuration, and the policy through the process of first it will grab all the patches, then it'll grab the configuration, then it'll grab the policy, rebooting as needed through the process, and then add itself to the cluster. So, and at the end of the day, this is the whole interface. Run it through the first time wizard, and then you have cluster management. On the gateway itself, you'll see the cluster management, which I'm going to show here. When you look at cluster management, what you'll see is the primary gateway with any pending gateways. So it will know that there is another unconfigured gateway that matches its configuration, cabled up accordingly. At that point, hit the add gateway button, you'll see the unconfigured gateway. Now at this point, and I'm going to show this in a second, you can either add it to an existing site or create a new site that is high availability off of site one. I'll show you the existing site first. What will happen is as soon as you hit add here, it will then grab the gateway and then start building the configuration. First, it checks for hotfixes, then it will check for the configuration, and then it will install a policy. This is not a bad thing to see during the process because the firewall will reboot over the course of time and will become temporarily unavailable due to reboots. But at the end, what you'll end up with is within Gaia, you will see the full gateway, the load. This happens to be in my lab, serial number, CPU load, RAM, basic statistics off of both boxes that are in the stack. I wanted to do a live demo for you. My lab is a little slower than I want it to be, and the process in my lab takes about 10 minutes, and I didn't think anybody really wanted to watch the grass grow for 10 minutes. So single gateway, adding into a single cluster, and then the CLI. You can also do this via API or CLI by doing a show cluster. At that point, you can add the cluster member. You notice this is the same as it showed in the Gaia web UI. And then you'll add the cluster. Once again, for anybody familiar with Maestro, this probably looks very familiar. It'll give you the statistics off each box, tell you what's going on, what's being used, and so on. And because I was curious, if you do a CPH prob stat, it shows you the active member, shows you what the pivot member is, and will give you the assigned load. Multi-site starts like this, where you'll still see site one, site two. When it gets added in, you'll see the second site with any gateways associated with that site. This still looks like a single object within management. So your dual site, similar to how Maestro works, and I keep using Maestro because that's where we pulled the technology from. This will work cross-site, same restrictions and clarifications that Maestro has. Just want to make sure the links are connected across multiple data centers, has the same kind of connectivity requirements. And then from there, this is the quick shot at Insights. Insights is a new tool that's going to be out with R82. Gives you a high-level dashboard on the gateway. You could simply launch this from the CLI. You do have to set your window up so you can actually get all the frames. but we'll give you an idea, including the cluster status, what blades are running, excuse me, and a high level rundown on the gateway. You can also get alerts and other additional information through it. But what I wanted to show you was this. As you are in the process of building the cluster, when you go to alerts, you will start seeing configuration cloning. Reboot not required. This is the process with which it goes through and builds the cluster, and you can watch this live through the Insights tool. Oh, wrong way. So summarize, first time wizard configuration, super simple cluster management, single management object, and it's all pivot based traffic forwarding. So it will scale on its own and send the traffic over across the across. So I'm at the questions and answers part of this.
All right. We'll take a
Do you have
sip
any
of water. I have
other
a bunch
questions for
for
me?
you.
Oh boy,
First one. Will there be a conversion from Cluster XL to Elastic XL in the future?
that is currently planned, though for the moment I will say because of the nature of how it does it, I wouldn't necessarily wait for it. I would definitely want to rebuild the cluster in the middle to start using ElasticXL sooner rather than later.
Yep. Will Elastic XL require multicast or will it work over unicast as per Cluster XL?
Unicast. There's no
Unicast.
multicast involved, thankfully.
Okay. Uh, got a couple different questions on, overhead and performance gain, so I'll mash them together here. Is Elastic XL linearly scalable? Um,
I'm going to say linear-ish, because the SMO does take a little bit of the performance off of the primary box. If you were to go and put, I'll use generic numbers and say they're both 10 gig firewalls. The first firewall might lose 10 to 15% performance just because of the management overhead, but the second firewall will use all 10 gig, and the third firewall will use all 10 gig.
okay. So yeah, the second part of that one was, is what is the performance gain on gateway 2, 3 compared to gateway 1? What's the overhead on gateway 1? So yeah, so most of the overhead is on 1 and 2 is just added on, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Licensing. The 3XL gateways count as one gateway to the management?
I am going to have to look and get back to that one
Yeah, we always get
because
the licensing questions. Yeah.
yeah, I know I should have been prepared for that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry
Uh,
for the people who asked.
let's see. Is that sync subnet default? Can it be changed additionally? Does it need to be a /24?
The sync network is set by the boxes themselves. So we don't let you modify that sync subnet, but that is internal to the boxes.
Mhm. Is the central deployment tool update supported via Smart Console? That's,
Or
yeah, I'm see,
so
and
yes, if it's related to ElasticXL, yes, with some caveats because it does do auto cloning, and you want to review auto cloning before you do any of the central deployment tool automatic updates.
okay. Is this supported on Open Server with RE2?
Yes.
Uh, Comment/question. So this is pretty much based on Nokia's IPSO clustering principle.
No, I believe that was the previous generation of Cluster XL, but I'm kind of going in the Wayback Machine.
Yeah,
Um, when I was working on the Nokia, when I first worked on Nokia boxes, they were all running VRRP. This technology is based on the Maestro hyperscaling that came from our scalable platform.
yep. 3800 series appliance, will it support ElasticXL?
Yes, it will. I could
How,
say that from my own personal experience.
how
Yeah,
about the
any
Spark
any
apply?
yeah, any modern gateway that is currently supported, that is maintrain Gaia, will support ElasticXL. It's part of R82. If the box is certified for R82, it'll run ElasticXL.
It appears that the neighbor switch connected to ElasticXL will be required to support bond interfaces? Question. this would be all interfaces. Are these accurate statements? So you don't need bonded interfaces, right?
N- for the management interface, you would need to set up a bond interface, but it can be an active backup bond. But for the non-management interface, you don't need to do bonds.
All right, for each network.
I mean, you would only do bonds if you wanted to do bonds.
Right. Let's see. Performance question. Are all interface bonds again, setting identical load sharing versus active standby? I think you just answered that.
Yep, there are load sharing.
Yeah. Once ElasticXL cluster has been created, and then we have a failed node, do we just put in a new gateway and build it automatically like Maestro?
Yep. So
Quick and
what
easy.
the process will happen is if node one fails, the SMO role will move to node two, same way it does in Maestro. And at that point, when you RMA, if you were to RMA the box, you would run through, make sure I I've got a belt and suspenders approach. I would just ensure that the operating system is upgraded. You've got the same build on both boxes, and at that point, you just add it back into the cluster like you would before. The SMO role should stay on the existing firewall, and then the secondary firewall will get upgraded and brought into the stack.
Got it. Let's see. I think there's a hardware question. Are the gateways in the ElasticXL cluster the same? I guess those all hardware have to be the same. Can you mix
That
appliances?
is currently that is what is supported.
Okay. How about VRRP again? How about VRRP to ElasticXL conversion?
Same as Cluster XL. You'd want to rebuild.
Uh, is there documented known limitations with this architecture?
Yep.
Like,
There are some in the R82 release notes. There are a list of known limitations for ElasticXL, but most of them are, I'll call them updates as opposed to limitations. Going from a traditional HA cluster to ElasticXL, there are some things that are just going to be different, and that's really where the limitations fall. Is things like the bond interface for the management interface, things along those lines.
yes, it will work on an open server. Dual site support. I assume you have to provide layer 2 between sites.
Yes.
Whoops, scrolled my screen by mistake. Hold on. Yep, just answered that one. The SMO feature does automatically move if the
Mhm.
node 1 fails. Is the
And let me throw in one thing for size, because I'm sure that if there's not a question, there probably will be as soon as somebody asks their local SE. For sizing, what I like to do is ensure, because in this case, we want to be able to provide for a, um, we want to be able to account for node failure, power supply, whatever. So when thinking about sizing for this, I would want to ensure that Gateway 1 can handle at least the normal amount of traffic. And I'm not talking about company meeting, burst traffic, everybody's going through the firewall to get to Zoom, things along those lines. But for normal operations, I'd like to size it so that if you get a single node that fails, the existing cluster can handle what's there.
right? Yeah, you have to.
So just
Yeah, be prepared
I
to
would
lose a yeah.
I always
Uh,
want to be prepared to lose a node. And if you want to go down the road of saying, well, I've got a pair of, say, 9100s, which are just fine, but right now we're getting up to being able to push, say, 7 gig of traffic on a regular basis. At that point, I might recommend adding another node to go to a 3 node cluster to account for,
right.
you know,
Yeah, give
failure.
yourself the buffer. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, is the communication from the pivot member to the members UDP?
No, it's flow based. It's TCP, but it's flow based.
Okay. I think we answered this. So from a design view, is ElasticXL something we should be using in a 2 node cluster?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I think if anything in a 2 node cluster, Um, I would simply recommend doing that just to be able to use both pieces of hardware.
Right.
Even if node one can handle the full load, I would do it just at this point. If anything, replacing the second node is a lot easier. but no reason not to use all the hardware you have available.
Oh, that's right. Um, Given that this is unicast, not multicast, does this mean that we have avoided the active-active cluster XL problems?
Yes, yes. In this case, because the SMO is handling every single flow. I know we have some older technologies that do this, but we have, because of how the distribution calculation works, it cleans up a lot of the issues we had with the legacy active-active.
Um, since this is pulled from Maestro, is the patching HFA procedure the same? Can we use management repository and smart console to initiate upgrades like cluster XL clusters?
Yes, but add auto cloning caveat. If you have auto cloning on, that you could end up with some bouncing. So what I would do in this case is turn auto cloning off, upgrade the primary member, and then you could turn auto cloning on, reboot the secondary member, and that'll pull the patches, secondary, tertiary member. But similar to Maestro.
Right.
Whoops.
No, you're good. Is there a limit on lower side hardware like the 3132s? The answer was no. Full Gaia, you're good, right? It can handle
Yep.
82. Known limitations we went through. Will it be supported for cloud environments, AWS Azure?
That is still TBD.
Okay.
The limitation on that is not our code, it's how the cloud platforms handle the cross communication between the cluster members. And for anybody who's tried to set up a cluster and cross AZ, you'll understand exactly what I'm talking about.
Right. Different animal.
Yes,
Since both gateway interfaces share the same IP, they would need to be attached to the same layer 2 switch or two switches in a VPC.
correct.
Right. Open server is supported, but also virtual VM firewall will be supported in ElasticXL.
Yes, it will.
Are upgrades hitless?
I will say, well, the answer is yes, with a big asterisk that says it depends on how you do it. If you upgrade both members at the same time and let them reboot at the same time, you have a problem.
Right.
But doing one at a time, it's the same as doing a cluster Excel style instance. If you want to do one at a time, you reboot a box, apply the patch, reboot the second box, apply the patch, and they will take over for each other in the meantime.
Right. Just follow the standard practice.
Yep.
Uh, is there a connections table consideration? Not sure.
Um, in general, I would say there's always a connections table in situation, but my experience, and I'm going to say this kind of lightly, saying it's based off my experience and Jay's opinion, is it feels like with the speed of the internet at this point, the connection table seems to matter a little less because customers are able to get their data quicker, so we don't have to keep the connections open as long. But the connection table does scale across both boxes.
Yeah, that was the next question. All connections are synced. If one node fails, do we expect any impact?
Nope, none.
Can we mix and match hardware like Maestro? We answered.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to recommend it, but you can.
Yeah. Is the performance shown as a single node, or can you see each individual node? I guess it matters on where you look, right?
Yeah, that's a question of where you look. That's where, because of how dashboard is going to, smart console is going to represent the data, you may not get all the nodes, but that's what the insight tool is there for, to help you get that information. And then the follow-up is also using Skyline, and you can get the utilization of each node as well.
Is the load balancing algorithm configurable like it is in Maestro?
Yep. Yep.
Last one, unless anybody else is going to type, is any plans for SMB devices?
I will say that that conversation is above my pay grade, but this, it is something that, as far as my understanding, it is roadmapped with the big asterisks of, roadmap things or things that we're trying to do. So,
Right.
but
Yeah,
the full answer to that question is above my pay grade.
I would agree with that. I would say logically probably at some point, but this is an already two thing, which is a new full Gaia. So, eventually features do move down, but it's roadmap, like you said.
Yep.
Let's see. Oh, we do got some more here. How about BGP? I'm assuming peering is handling by the SMO like in Maestro. So if the current SMO goes down, BGP has to reestablish on the next cluster member.
The so I need to test this because I want to test it anyway. But the route table is shared across the cluster members. You will need to reestablish the BGP session, but it will still share the existing route table, so you won't see an outage.
Great. Well, here's the current last one. We'll see if this one sticks. Troubleshooting question. For troubleshooting, packet capture, or debug, how do you determine which node is handling a connection of interest?
There's a command that I'm going to screw up pretty heavily, but it's the DXL calculator. So if you were to go onto one of the gateways and do it, I believe it's DXL space calc, but you need to fact check me on that one. Um, you can give it the source and the destination, it will tell you what node is going to go over. So you can then do a packet capture from there.
Fantastic. All right, I think that rolled it. Go take a sip of water. Good job, J. Dot.
Great.
Mm,
Well, thanks everybody for attending. I hope everybody has a happy Halloween and enjoy the candy later.
yeah, we will. Yeah, our next, we'll send a follow-up email with any reference content and the recording link to this session. Our next webinar will be in 2 weeks. You'll see the invitation for that soon. But with that, yeah, thanks again, Jay, and everyone else. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you here next time. Enjoy your day. Happy Halloween. Bye,
Great.
all.
Thanks everybody. Bye.